There is a moment, just after someone has disrespected you, where everything inside wants to speak, to defend, to correct, to not be misunderstood. But what if I told you that this is not the time to speak, but to watch? Not because you are weak, not because you don't care, but because you value your energy far too much to spend it where it will not be received. In that silence, something greater than words begins to move. A deeper intelligence, life itself, starts to respond. What you couldn't teach with shouting, karma will reveal in time. And your silence becomes sacred. Not all power is loud. Not all lessons are spoken. And not all pain needs retaliation. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do after being disrespected is nothing. Let karma speak where you have chosen to be still. And in that stillness, you will discover that peace is not passive, it is discipline. A quiet discipline rooted in self-respect, clarity, and the deep knowing that life balances all things in time. Welcome to Self-Mastery, your space for real wisdom and inner growth. Subscribe and remember our name, Self-Mastery, because others may copy the voice, but the truth lives here. Let us begin. There are moments in life, especially in relationships, when silence holds a power that words cannot match. After someone has disrespected you, your instincts may scream for justice, for acknowledgement, for someone to understand the weight of the offense. You want to explain yourself, clarify your intent, maybe even lash out. But what if, in that very moment, the wisest response is no response at all? Not as a form of surrender, but as a conscious act of self-respect. Silence, after all, is not just the absence of speech, it is a presence. A powerful, intentional energy that reflects more than any spoken word could ever reveal. When someone disrespects you, dismisses your value, mocks your sincerity, belittles your kindness, their behavior speaks volumes about their own inner disarray. Your words, no matter how carefully crafted, will not always penetrate the noise within them. In fact, the more you try to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, the further you move from your own center. It is in this space, this tension between wanting to react and choosing to reflect, that silence becomes your mirror. Silence doesn't mean you're pretending nothing happened. It means you're allowing the truth to unfold naturally, like muddy water that clears only when left undisturbed. The truth of a person's character becomes clearer when you're no longer stirring the waters with your responses. People show you who they are, not when things are calm, but when they feel entitled to disrespect you and believe you won't walk away. That's the moment when your silence becomes your greatest ally. Consider a woman who had been in a relationship for over 7 years. She had given her heart, her time, her loyalty. She didn't ask for grand gestures, only mutual respect. But over time, her partner began making subtle jabs in front of friends, turning private matters into public jokes, questioning her intellect in ways that disguised cruelty as humor. Each time, she spoke up kindly, then firmly, but nothing changed. Eventually, she stopped arguing. She stopped defending herself. She didn't announce her silence with resentment. She simply chose not to play the game anymore. A friend once asked her, "Why don't you say something back?" She replied, "Because I don't need to keep explaining to someone who already knows they're being unkind. My silence is not weakness. It's my final boundary." And something remarkable happened. In the silence that followed, the dynamics shifted, not immediately, but over time. The discomfort of not having her engagement, her emotional reactions, her defenses, her participation in the pattern became too loud for him to ignore. Without her responses to bounce off, he had only himself to face. The silence exposed his behavior like a light in a dark room. Neuroscience supports this choice in a profound way. When we are disrespected, the emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, fire intensely. This often triggers a fight or flight response. However, by choosing silence and engaging the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reasoning and self-regulation center, we activate higher awareness. It is this space, created by our restraint, that allows for clarity to emerge. We are not suppressing our feelings. We are giving ourselves the dignity of processing them with wisdom, not woundedness. And this isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending we're unaffected. It's about transcending the chaos. A silent response, when rooted in awareness, isn't passive. It's an active decision to preserve your peace. You are not abandoning the moment. You are stepping into it with grace. You are saying, I choose not to lower my frequency to match the disrespect that was offered to me. Silence gives space for observation. And in that space, we see who continues to provoke, who begins to retreat, who grows uncomfortable in the absence of conflict. Because disrespect often seeks reaction, and when it doesn't get it, it loses its grip. Eastern philosophy teaches us that water is soft, yet it carves through mountains. In the same way, silence may appear passive, but over time, it reshapes the entire emotional landscape of a relationship. It forces the other to confront their own actions without distraction, and it allows you to remain grounded, unshaken. There is a quote often attributed to Rumi that says, "The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear." This isn't just poetic, it's practical. When we stop speaking, we start listening to our own intuition, to our nervous system, to the subtle dynamics unfolding around us. You might notice that the person who disrespected you grows restless in the absence of your reaction. You might see others step in to reflect truths you no longer have to speak. You might even realize that your silence gave you something far greater than any argument could: emotional clarity. This clarity brings us to another truth that we often overlook. Your energy communicates more than your words ever could. Even in silence, your presence speaks. The energy you carry into a room, into a relationship, into a confrontation, it tells a story, and people can feel it. A woman walking away from a disrespectful situation without a single word does not need to announce her boundaries. Her energy has already drawn the line. Her calmness confuses those who expected chaos. Her stillness confronts those who were waiting for a fight. And it's not because she doesn't care. It's because she has learned to care for herself first. There's a phenomenon in psychology called as limbic resonances, which describes how humans unconsciously exchange emotional energy through the limbic system. Simply put, your emotional state influences others even without words. If you remain calm, grounded, and non-reactive, others begin to adjust themselves to your energy. This is why a peaceful person can walk into a room and change its atmosphere. Why someone's silent disapproval can feel more painful than shouted criticism. It is here that your discipline becomes your message. When you stay quiet after being disrespected, you're not just avoiding confrontation. You are transmitting something far deeper. I will not allow you to pull me into your storm. I have built a center within me that you cannot shake. Think of the women who hold power in their posture, in their gaze, in their stillness. They do not shout to be heard. Their presence does the speaking. Their self-respect is not loud. It is luminous. And the impact of their silence is often more memorable than any speech they could have given. In relationships, this power is especially vital. Many times, people test boundaries not because they want to destroy the connection, but because they are unconsciously looking to find where the edges lie. When you meet disrespect with silence and stillness, not icy, punishing silence, but composed detachment, you are making it clear, I will not stay where I am not honored. This kind of energy doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't force others to see its value. It simply walks with the quiet confidence that if someone can't recognize your worth, they were never meant to keep your presence. There is a short story of an elderly woman who lived in a mountain village. She was known for her quiet demeanor. One day, a group of travelers mocked her appearance, laughed at her worn clothes, and tried to provoke her into reacting. She said nothing. She simply served them tea, bowed respectfully, and continued her day. A young villager later asked, "Why didn't you say anything? They were so disrespectful to you." She replied, "When someone offers you a gift and you don't take it, to whom does it belong? That is the essence of energetic self-mastery. Disrespect is a gift wrapped in the giver's own pain, insecurity, and immaturity. When you refuse to receive it, it stays with them. Your silence returns it unopened. Over time, those who live with reactive energy learn that not every door opens for their noise. And those who carry stillness learn that their peace doesn't require explanation the more you cultivate your energy. Through mindfulness, breath, conscious awareness, the more clearly others can feel it. And those who are meant to walk with you will match it. Others will fade, and there is wisdom in both outcomes. So the next time someone disrespects you, pause, breathe, drop into the stillness beneath your chest, feel the temptation to react rise, and then let it pass like a wave. And from that quiet place within, ask yourself, is this a moment to be heard or a moment to be still? Because your silence is never empty. It's full of your decision, full of your boundaries, full of your presence. And sometimes that's all that's needed to let karma begin its work. There is a certain strength that only emerges when you choose not to react. Not from avoidance, not from fear, but from a place within you that has matured beyond the need for emotional exchanges that offer no growth. Stillness, after you've been disrespected, is not about holding your tongue to appear composed. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about walking away from a battlefield that never deserved your presence to begin with. There are times in life, and especially in relationships, where to argue would be to cheapen your soul, to try and explain yourself to someone who already dismissed your value would only reinforce their disregard. And so, you choose the higher ground, not because you're above others, but because you've finally understood that your peace is more important than being understood. Consider a woman whose partner began to subtly erode her confidence. He didn't yell or insult her outright, but through sarcasm, neglect, and emotional distance, he made her question her worth. When she tried to bring it up, he minimized her concerns, saying she was too sensitive, too emotional. For a while, she fought back with explanations, hoping that if she just said the right words, he would understand. But nothing changed. Eventually, something within her shifted. One evening, after another conversation that left her feeling hollow, she chose stillness. She didn't retaliate, didn't beg, didn't try to convince him. She just stopped participating in the cycle. Her stillness was not silence born of defeat. It was the beginning of self-preservation. From the outside, it might have looked like nothing had changed, but internally, she was reclaiming ground. Her stillness was building walls around her inner sanctuary. No more energy wasted trying to fix what did not want to be healed. She no longer rushed to correct misunderstandings. She allowed him to live in the reality he created, while she started returning to herself. This form of emotional withdrawal is not passive aggression. It is sacred self-regulation. It's the awareness that some arguments are designed not to resolve, but to consume. And choosing not to engage doesn't mean you're weak. It means you finally see the cost. Not every battle is worthy of your involvement. Not every insult needs a counterpoint. True dignity arises when you realize that your reaction is a gift and you get to choose who receives it. There's a story from Eastern tradition about a monk who was slapped in the face by an angry visitor. The monk did not respond. He simply bowed and walked away. When asked later why he didn't defend himself, he said, "Because to respond in anger would mean I had let the visitor inside my heart." That is what stillness does. It guards the sacred space within you. And in relationships, this space is where your self-respect lives. Once someone steps inside that space and begins to rearrange the furniture of your mind, without respect, stillness becomes the act of closing the door. Western psychology also supports this. Emotional regulation is one of the most essential traits of psychological maturity. Those who can pause before responding are not emotionally repressed. They are emotionally intelligent. Research shows that people who practice intentional stillness in conflict situations experience less regret, lower cortisol levels, and greater clarity in decision making. It is not the absence of emotion, but the discipline to channel that emotion inward before it is released outward. And this practice is what protects your dignity in moments where disrespect could provoke you to act out of pain. In truth, many people are not used to stillness. They interpret your lack of response as confusion, indifference, or even guilt. But over time, stillness reveals itself as strength. It becomes a mirror showing others their behavior without your commentary, without your reaction to distract them from themselves. That space, that silence, it's where their accountability begins. And then something even more powerful unfolds. You no longer feel the need to manage their learning. You trust that the consequences of their actions will do what your words never could. You let the natural law of return take over. Every action carries its own echo. Every seed sown, especially in relationships, grows into something. Whether it's connection or disconnection, healing or harm, what we give will always return. Not always through revenge or confrontation, but through the quiet unfolding of life. This is where many struggle. They want the offender to see, to acknowledge, to feel what they felt. But that desire, though natural, often keeps you attached to the very pain you're trying to leave. Letting karma speak doesn't mean you're hoping for harm to befall the other. It means you are releasing your role as the teacher, the corrector, the redeemer. You are surrendering the outcome and trusting that life is not blind, that what is done in darkness always finds its way into the light. Think of the woman who was constantly blamed by her partner for every disagreement. He rarely took responsibility, always redirecting the narrative to make her feel unstable. She read every book, went to counseling alone, tried to fix what felt broken, until one day she realized she was the only one trying. And so she stopped explaining. She stopped pushing for shared accountability. She stopped defending her heart in a courtroom where the judge had already decided the verdict. She left, not in anger, not in chaos, but in stillness. Months later, he reached out, confused by her silence, unsettled by her absence. He was beginning to face the discomfort that her previous reactions had shielded him from. Her silence forced him to look inward for answers she used to provide, and though he never admitted fault, she knew her silence had done more than her words ever could. It made him sit with himself. Letting life teach others means you have come to a place of inner abundance. You no longer need validation from the one who wounded you. You know who you are. You know what you deserve. And most importantly, you know that every moment spent chasing acknowledgement from someone who refuses to grow is a moment stolen from your own healing. This isn't indifference. It's profound trust. Trust that your energy is better spent cultivating peace than arguing with chaos. Trust that people who treat others poorly are often already living in the discomfort their behavior brings. It just takes time for the echo to reach them. There's a quote that says, "You don't always need to tell your side of the story. Time will." And indeed, time is the most honest storyteller. It reveals what we try to hide, elevates what we try to suppress, and balances what was out of alignment. When you remain still, you give time the space to do its work. But this stillness is not to be confused with waiting. You are not sitting quietly hoping for their regret. You are moving forward, quietly building a life that no longer revolves around needing closure from someone who never offered you respect. Your stillness is not a pause in your life. It is the beginning of a new rhythm, one where your dignity sets the pace. Many find this path difficult because they are still emotionally entangled. They still carry hope that their silence will provoke remorse. But true stillness comes when you let go of that hope, when you no longer need them to realize what they lost. You simply recognize that their lesson is no longer your responsibility. Karma, in its truest sense, is not revenge. It is simply alignment. When someone violates a principle of respect, integrity, or love, life eventually redirects the consequence. You may not witness it. You may never hear the apology. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Your peace doesn't depend on their accountability. It rests on your ability to walk away without bitterness. This inner detachment is one of the most powerful forms of emotional liberation. When you no longer seek justice in the form of personal apology, you begin to taste a deeper justice, the one life itself delivers. And it may not come in dramatic ways. It may come through the weight of their own decisions, the erosion of their peace, the absence of meaningful relationships. But by then, you are too far on your path to look back. There is a woman who lived many years in a toxic marriage. Her husband was emotionally manipulative, consistently undermining her intelligence and limiting her independence. When she finally left, she didn't burn bridges or seek revenge. She quietly built her life from scratch. Years later, her former husband found himself alone, isolated, struggling with regret. By that time, she had healed, grown, and surrounded herself with people who truly saw her. She didn't need to see his karma unfold, but life made sure he did. And so, when you choose stillness after disrespect, you are not just practicing emotional discipline. You are aligning yourself with a greater intelligence, one that doesn't require force to restore balance. You are stepping out of the cycle of reaction and into the rhythm of inner peace. In that rhythm, your silence becomes sacred, your energy becomes sovereign, and the lessons others need to learn, those are no longer your concern. They will learn them, or they won't. But either way, you will have kept your soul intact, and that is the true reward. There is a moment in every woman's life when she must choose between temporary satisfaction and long-term peace. After disrespect, the urge to react, to justify oneself, or to demand change is natural. But the deeper question is not, how can I make them understand? Rather, it becomes, what am I sacrificing every time I respond from a place of pain instead of discipline? Emotional discipline is not the suppression of feelings. It is the conscious guidance of them. It is a form of self-respect that refuses to hand over your energy to situations that do not nourish your spirit. When you are emotionally disciplined, you begin to realize that you are not required to attend every argument you're invited to. You do not need to light yourself on fire to keep a relationship warm. In relationships, especially romantic ones, disrespect doesn't always arrive in loud forms. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in dismissive tones, in overlooked needs, in subtle manipulations that make you feel guilty for wanting to be treated well. And in those moments, the most powerful thing you can do is not to escalate, not to argue, but to pause, not the kind of pause that waits for an apology, but the kind that listens to your own soul asking, why am I trying to convince someone of my worth? A woman once shared the story of how her partner consistently criticized her appearance, her tone of voice, her cooking, always under the disguise of helping her improve. She would try to do better, to adjust, to make things smoother. She spent months trying to mold herself into someone he would stop correcting. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. The turning point came not with a final fight, but with a quiet realization. She wasn't living her own life anymore. She was constantly auditioning for love, hoping that one day she would be accepted. The emotional weight of this realization shattered her, but it also set her free. She didn't need to scream or explain herself. She simply chose to stop trying to be acceptable to someone who never saw her as enough. And in that act of emotional discipline, she began reclaiming her life. It is easy to believe that silence means you're giving up. But the truth is, silence after disrespect is often the first sign that you've finally chosen yourself. To hold your peace in the middle of emotional chaos is an act of maturity. The body will react, the mind will shout, but your discipline comes from a deeper place, a place that knows true strength doesn't show itself in how loudly you can defend your dignity, but in how deeply you know it can never be taken from you. Scientific research supports the wisdom of emotional regulation. When faced with emotional stress, the brain often defaults to reactive patterns rooted in the amygdala. But when we pause, breathe, and choose not to react immediately, we engage the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, judgment, and long-term thinking. This process doesn't just change how we feel in the moment. It reshapes the architecture of our brain over time, making us more resilient, more centered, and more in control of our lives. In other words, emotional discipline isn't just spiritual, it's biological. There is also an energetic reality to consider. Emotions are not just feelings, they are forms of energy: anger, fear, resentment. These are all energies that move through the body, and when not mastered, they can cloud our ability to see clearly. In Eastern traditions, emotional mastery is viewed as a prerequisite to wisdom. You cannot see clearly if your inner world is in turmoil. Just as muddy water must settle before it becomes clear, so too must our emotions settle before we can act from a place of truth. When a woman chooses to remain after being disrespected, she is not denying her feelings. She is holding them like a flame in her palm without letting it burn her. She is choosing not to let the outer storm dictate her inner weather. This is not a denial of emotion. It is the highest form of emotional sovereignty. It is saying, I see what you've done. I feel what it triggered in me, but I will not give you the power to shape who I become. This act of stillness, this restraint, is what sets emotionally mature women apart. It is not an act of ego, but of humility. The humility to recognize that trying to control others is futile. The humility to accept that not everyone will meet you where you are. And the strength to walk away when you realize that staying would mean abandoning yourself. Emotional discipline becomes a foundation for a new kind of relationship, not one built on the shaky ground of reaction and blame, but one rooted in self-awareness and clarity. When you no longer need someone to validate you, you attract connections that honor your presence without demand. You begin to choose people who do not drain your peace, but contribute to it. And yet, none of this is possible if you cannot hear your own voice. When the noise of the world, the opinions of others, and the echoes of past pain grow too loud, the only way to reconnect with your truth is to go inward, to find silence, not just around you, but within you. Because in silence, you hear what you've been avoiding, and in that voice, You find the compass that leads you home. There was a woman who spent years jumping from one relationship to another, always looking for someone to complete her. She believed that love meant proving her loyalty, sacrificing her needs, and enduring emotional wounds in the name of connection. But each relationship ended the same way, with her feeling more lost than before. It wasn't until she spent an entire year alone, without romantic distractions, that she began to realize she had never actually listened to herself. She had always been so consumed by external validation that her internal voice had been buried. During this period of solitude, she started practicing meditation. She journaled. She walked in nature without music. And in that silence, a strange thing happened. She began hearing the quiet truth that had always lived within her. The truth that she was already whole, that her intuition was not broken, just unheard. And the more she listened, the more clearly she could see which relationships had served her growth and which had only fed her fear of being alone. That is what silence gives us. The space to reconnect with our intuition, to rebuild the bridge between mind and body, between desire and discipline, between reaction and wisdom. In modern life, silence is rare, and that makes it sacred. When a woman learns to be quiet, not in submission, but in strength, she accesses a level of clarity that cannot be shaken by outside noise. This clarity transforms how she navigates relationships. She no longer explains herself to people who do not listen. She no longer waits for change from someone who is invested in staying the same. She no longer sacrifices her peace to keep others comfortable. Instead, she lives from a place of alignment. And that alignment becomes her compass. Psychologically, this is tied to a concept known as interoception, the ability to sense what is happening within your body. Women with high interoceptive awareness tend to have stronger emotional intelligence and greater self-regulation. When you are in tune with your internal state, you don't need external validation to confirm your truth. You feel it, you trust it, and you follow it, even when it's difficult. This connection to your inner voice becomes even more vital after you've experienced disrespect, because disrespect often confuses the nervous system. It makes you question yourself, doubt your instincts, and silence your needs. But the more you practice stillness, the more you begin to differentiate between the voice of fear and the voice of intuition. And once you've heard the voice of intuition clearly, you will never again allow it to be silenced. Stillness, then, is not merely a response, it's a strategy. It is how you come back to yourself after the world has tried to pull you apart. It is how you regain your vision after emotional fog. It is how you remember who you are when others have tried to convince you that you are someone less. The world may not reward your silence. Some may misinterpret it as weakness. Others may be threatened by your peace. But none of that matters. Because the reward of stillness is not applause, it is clarity. The kind of clarity that cannot be bought, or borrowed, or begged for. It must be earned through presence, through pause, through the quiet courage of choosing not to react. This choice is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. A woman must remind herself each day that her energy is precious, that her emotions are sacred, that not everything deserves a response, and that her silence, when rooted in truth, carries more wisdom than the loudest words ever could. In relationships, this becomes a powerful filter. You begin to see who respects your silence and who is threatened by it, who seeks understanding and who seeks control. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to see yourself not as someone who needs to be chosen, but as someone who is already whole. In the end, your silence is not just a reaction to disrespect, it is a declaration. A declaration that your peace is not negotiable, that your dignity is not dependent on another's perception, and that your worth was never up for debate. In the end, silence is not about hiding. It is about honoring. It is not weakness, but wisdom in motion. When a woman chooses stillness in the face of disrespect, she is not shrinking, she is rising inwardly, reclaiming her center. She no longer wastes energy explaining her worth to those who cannot see it, nor does she surrender her peace to conversations that dishonor her presence. She becomes the guardian of her own soul, measured, composed, and unshaken. Through the discipline of silence, she reclaims her dignity. Through the clarity of inner listening, she rediscovers her truth. And through the quiet trust in life's natural order, she lets go of the burden of justice, knowing that all things return in time. The lessons others refuse to learn through your words, they will one day encounter through their own experiences. That is the work of life, not yours to carry. So she stays still, not because she is defeated, but because she has awakened. Awakened to the fact that not every reaction is a response. Not every invitation to conflict deserves her voice. And not every relationship deserves the full access to her heart. Her silence is not empty. It is full of knowing. And in that sacred stillness, she becomes untouchable, not by hiding, but by embodying a peace that no disrespect can disturb. Let karma speak. Let your presence do the talking. And let your silence become the loudest testimony of your self-respect.